someday I'll wish upon the star. Wake up where the clouds are far behind.
Please join in the chalice lighting with the words shown on the screen. Welcoming all free seekers of truth and meaning, we gather to excite the human spirit, to inspire its growth and development, to respond morally and ethically to a troubled world, and to sustain a vital and nurturing religious community. Next, we'll sing a unison song. The words will appear on the screen. Please join in singing "Come Sing a Song with Me" by Carolyn Dade, led by Alyssa Yeager.
I'll be doing the first verse on a la, for those of you who aren't familiar with the melody.
Susan Verde, And today I'm going to read the book I Am Peace, written by me and illustrated by Peter H. Reynolds. There are times when I worry about what might happen next and what happened before. The thoughts in my head are like rushing water, and I feel like a boat with no anchor, being carried away. I give myself a moment. I take a breath, and then I tell myself it's all right. I feel the ground beneath my feet and steady myself. And start to notice the here and the now. My thoughts begin to settle. My mind begins to clear. I am peace. I can watch my worries gently pop and disappear. I let things go. I can say what I feel inside out loud. I know myself. I can share kindness with others. I make a difference. Oh, and look what happened. The seeds dropped. And all of a sudden, something starts to grow. I can hug a tree and thank it for its beauty and strength. I connect to nature. I can watch the clouds make shapes against the sky. I know wonder. I can taste and smell and touch and hear and see what is all around me. I use my senses. I can feel my breath fill my whole body. I tune into me. Now the water is still. I have found my anchor and everything is all right. I don't need to worry about before or after. I am in this moment. I am peace. Now I share my peace with others and hope that it is carried away to those who need it. And I dream we are peace. And that is the end. Thank you.
Now is the time for children and youth from pre-K through the 8th grade to go to their Sunday morning religious education groups. Please refer to the sign in the lobby if you are not sure where your child belongs, or ask at the welcome table. Also in the lobby, children can be picked up or met when the service is over. We now welcome our viewers from Facebook, who will be joining us now for our service. My name is Al DeSalvo, and I'm a service associate today. And for the Facebook viewers, we welcome in our pulpit today the Reverend Dr. Leonisa Ardizzone. She's a peace educator serving on the faculty of Vassar College. She serves as an affiliate minister at the Fourth Universalist Society in New York City. She is an active member of the Kingston Interfaith Council and offers workshops for clergy and educators on addressing climate change. Reverend Leonisa is also a writer and a musician.
Good morning again to all here and to all on Facebook. Our reading this morning is an excerpt from Peace Education, a book by Ian Harris and Mary Lee Morrison. Peace education represents a celebration of life rather than a support for the death-bearing values implied in violent militaristic cultures. Peace education confronts the horrors of these images and presents a vision of a different, nonviolent world. Peace education does not so much tell people what to think about the future, but rather how to think about the future. They can point out to students the already existing peace-loving aspects of human civilization and emphasize the dreams of those trying to create a better future. This type of education does not build upon one vision for the future, but rather attempts to create a multiplicity of visions, to restore utopian thinking, and to encourage imagination. In peace education classes, students examine how to take control of their own lives to work for a more humanistic society based on social justice and human rights with equality for all. They ask the question, what kind of world do we really want, and what will it take to get there? And with those thoughts, I invite us to enter into a time of reflection and meditation. If we are paying even a little bit of attention, we see the world around us filled with suffering and uncertainty. Many of us, I imagine, are feeling rage, sadness, but probably not surprise about the outcome of the Rittenhouse trial. Many of us are also aware that yesterday was Trans Day of Awareness and are carrying concern for and solidarity with our trans siblings. Many of us may probably also be feeling let down and frustrated by the outcome of COP26. We are carrying a lot. And while we carry all these sadnesses and concerns in our hearts, we may also find ourselves counting our blessings, finding ways to be grateful for what we have and who we know. As we enter into this time for meditation, I encourage you to breathe deeply and to be okay with the complexity of what you are feeling. Hold both your anger and sadness and your joy and gratitude. As our video story told us, breathe deep and see yourself as an instrument of peace. Use this time to find your center as we consider the work we are called to do to heal the world with love. Long before I became a minister, I became a teacher. My teaching career unofficially began in Guatemala, where I worked as a volunteer during their civil war in 1992. I wasn't there as a teacher. I was there to volunteer, having given up a spot in the Peace Corps in Zaire a year prior. But I consider my time in Guatemala as the start of my career in education, because it was during that time when I realized just how unjust the world is, and I felt called to work for change. I had more than an inkling about this, of course, thanks to friends in high school, courses in college, and the campus activism I was involved in the 80s. But being in Guatemala and experiencing on my first morning a procession of protesting indigenous women carrying signs asking, "Where are our husbands? Where are our fathers?" My eyes were thrust open. I learned right then about the desaparecidos, and my education continued whenever I was checked boarding or debarking a bus by a teenager with a machine gun, or when I'd see gunfire in the hills at night, or when I'd see missionaries working to save souls but not improve living conditions. During my time there, I had many conversations that opened my mind and my heart. And when I returned home, I did a deep dive into Guatemalan history to try and understand the roots of their situation. Many years later, I would learn that uncovering root causes are central to the practice of peace education and the act of peace building. As many of you may already know, I discovered it was the United States policies and practices in Guatemala and throughout Latin America that were directly responsible for the devastation that Guatemala and so many other nations experienced. Neo-imperialism, greed, and violence had led to destruction, death, and long-term destabilization. And of course, this was a pattern. The United States government was quite good at wreaking havoc in other places than abdicating any responsibility to help in the aftermath. But here's the funny thing I uncovered. Not funny, haha, funny like this milk smells bad, right? I noticed that so much of US and other imperialist mindset nations' intervention in the world is done in the name of creating peace. And all these years later, now with a PhD 20 years ago in peace education, I have to wonder, how the heck are they defining peace? Peace is one of those words that trips people up. It's often viewed as too lofty or fluffy, or utopian and impossible. Or it becomes one of those relative concepts that falls into the unclear trap of whose peace? Conflict, violence, and justice are also terms that folks struggle with. Many of us have diverging definitions of these big ideas, peace and conflict and violence, which leads to confusion, more conflict, and oftentimes great acts of violence. World history is riddled with wars and oppressive systems and structures meant to, in the eyes of the power holder, create peace and stability, but probably more accurately, just enforces silence and submission. But that is not true peace. In peace education, we provide and model a method of critically and systematically looking at issues to unpack assumptions, identify root causes, and then creatively enter into dialogue towards transformation and repair. And to do this, we have to start with some real definitions. In peace education, we utilize a rather encompassing definition of violence, one that feels rather connected to our UU principle, our first UU principle, because it looks at harm in relation to dignity. Violence, in my work, as defined by the Swedish peace researcher Johan Galtung, is anything that insults the dignity of another being, and thus is not just limited to physical violence. Most people conceive of violence as direct violence, the direct harm by an actor or actors, also called personal violence, but most direct violence occurs due to the feelings of marginalization and despair and repression and desperation created by our structurally violent world. So it is important that we acknowledge the presence of structural violence, which I have to say, after more than 20 years in this field, it is thankfully entering mainstream discussions, but with different terms: structural racism, systemic oppression, and white supremacy. Which makes it clear, all those terms are trying to make it clear to us that violence is embedded into the structures and institutions of society, and not by accident. Structural violence is then perpetuated by cultural violence, the ways of thinking, being, and educating that maintain these hierarchical and oppressive systems. Organized religion and schools are just two vehicles of cultural violence. And as you can hopefully see, all these forms of violence are interconnected. So they must all be considered if we want to work for peace and justice. I should also add that, since some of you may be familiar with it, that there is a parallel model of conceptualizing violence which was put forth just around the same time by Dr. Martin Luther King. And he called it the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism. These three, as he outlines, are all structural forces that propagate violence. And in both cases, we have to see these violence triplets before we can have lasting and true peace. So while it's not a cheery thought, peace educators like myself tend to start everything we do with an assumption of violence in some form. Conflict and harm are always present, but it's how we look at conflict, oppression, and harm that makes it possible for us to not just create an illusion of peace or a temporary band-aid mollifying version of peace, but rather true peace. But what is this true peace? Again, peace researchers use the terms negative peace and positive peace. Negative peace is the taking away of the directly bad violence, thus the removal of direct or personal violence. So yeah, ending wars and interpersonal violence is a good thing, and we should work for that, but it's only the start. To create positive peace, we need to remove all the things that then insult or harm one's dignity. So we need to remove all the structural violence, the oppression, the poverty, alienation, injustice. I'm looking at the singing bowl, and I'm going to use it as a teaching tool. Prefer to think of it this way. What if our bowl, as we know, is full with all these things that harm us, physical violence, structural violence? So negative peace is emptying that bowl out of all those harmful things. Positive peace is saying, now let's refill the bowl, the cup, with true peace, justice, human rights, environmental responsibility, a home, healthcare, you name it, all the things that honor and respect one's dignity. But this is no small task, right? And we as people of faith, especially this faith, which claims to be inclusive, justice-seeking, and committed to peace and world community, it's in our principles after all, are part of that solution. But we need tools, and that's where peace education can help. Today, we are overwhelmed with examples of both direct and structural violence, but not everyone sees them as such. Have any of you, and I'm sure you have, lately tried having a conversation about racism and the historical roots of the United States with anyone? Yeah. Folks are just unable to see the forest for the trees. The same is true with violence against women, crushing debt, rampant poverty, housing crisis, and climate change. So many folks cannot see issues as systemic and interconnected. And they certainly then have trouble seeing root causes. And that's where we begin, as I mentioned earlier, in peace education. So let's take, for an example, local violence, right? The direct violence that happens in struggling communities, like crime, and right? Outsiders like to lay the blame on some inherent flaws of the people who are committing these acts of violence and their place in the world. But with a peace education lens, we could see that the root cause of this direct violence is poverty, instability, which are manifestations of structural violence. People act out violently, even against their neighbors, if and when they have limited opportunity, limited resources, and are actively subjugated by society because of their skin color or country of origin. It's really not hard to see the connection once you take a look. So in peace education, when we want to understand a conflict or issue, we start with assumptions. What do we think we know? What do we see on the surface? What is the media telling us? What might be left out? How are our feelings involved in the issue? By naming and unpacking assumptions, we can see our blind spots, and we can also see what's in the room. We see that everyone's perceptions comes from a variety of perspectives. By airing and seeing these perspectives, we can actually, hopefully, hear one another and begin to see the complexity of an issue. Then we begin to dig to the roots of the issue. As I just mentioned, the root cause of urban violence is not people are amoral and don't care about their neighbors. That's just someone's perspective looking in from the outside. But root causes go deeper. Like we said, poverty, underfunded schools based on racist redlining policies, and historical and systemic racism, to name only a few. By using a systems lens coupled with critical and historical analysis, it's easy to see that conflicts and problems usually run a lot deeper than they seem. So simply, peace education is this practice. It's not just saying, let's be kind and get along. It's looking at things deeply, critically, and then connecting the dots. We can use this for something as big as questioning why our government seems to do nothing to address climate change, or something smaller like a conflict in a congregation. By looking for root causes, your whole perspective on how things work or don't work will shift. And then it gets better. We begin to see problems through this interconnected lens. We have so much more to work with when it comes to generating ideas to transform or change things. So peace education is futures oriented, meaning that even though we examine the past to understand a situation, we develop solutions that help create the future we wish to see. I like to use personally the 3 core values of peace education to frame all of my work, whether it's teaching or ministry. My mentor, Dr. Betty Reardon, who at 92 is still traveling the world and teaching these core values, she is one of the founders of peace education, and she wrote these down in the 1980s. They are humane relationship, global citizenship, planetary stewardship. As UUs, these values are entirely consistent with our principles. Actually, I often think that I probably became a UU because through our principles, I saw beautiful connections to peace education. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about how can we embody these values. So here are a few thoughts. Humane relationship is calling us to treat one another with dignity, to value one another's inherent worth, to recognize human rights as universal, and to work to ensure that all people, and I would say all living things, feel seen and heard and valued and protected. Global citizenship is the reminder that none of us is isolated or superior, that we are all citizens of Earth, or better yet, as Carl Sagan used to say, citizens of the cosmos. And as such, we have a responsibility to all our earthly relations, not just people we know or people who think like us or look like us. As we enter into an age where climate change is about to impact people unevenly, we have to make choices that put the needs of others, even if they are on the other side of the world, into conversation with our actions. Which brings me to planetary stewardship. We have one planet, one interconnected web of life of which we all are a part, and thus we must care for it. Much like the violence triplets are interconnected, so too are these core values. What would it be like to live your life, teach our children, run our congregations, do our jobs with these ideas front and center in our minds and hearts and bodies? I invite us all to try. Many years ago, Gandhi said, "We must be the change we wish to see in the world." I believe that traveling through the world with a peace education perspective can allow us to do just that. We can live the world we want to see into creation. So may we raise our own awareness of violence and the harm it causes in all its forms. May we critically examine our world and our own choices to better understand the roots of harm. May we be agents of change and instruments of peace that the world so desperately needs. May it be so.
An important way we celebrate life each Sunday is by offering an opportunity to practice generosity. Members and friends support our congregation with an annual pledge paid throughout the year. And another way to support the good work of this congregation is by making a generous contribution as we pass the plate, or by way of the options shown on the next slide for those of you who are looking on Facebook and on Zoom. If you are joining us virtually, you can click on the tiny URL link in the chat window to contribute. Or you can send a text to the number shown on the screen. The examples on the slide will show you how to label your text to indicate the amount and the purpose or the intent of your gift. And we must now say goodbye to our Facebook friends. Consider joining us on Zoom next time, or visit us in person at 405 Washington Avenue in Albany. You can find, you can find more information at albanyuu.org. Our offertory music is Imagine by John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and it will be presented by Alyssa Yeager. enjoy welcoming guests and visitors to our service. If you'd like to tell us who you are and where you're from, those here in Community Hall should stand or raise your hand, and Dawn, the usher, will bring you a microphone so that everyone can hear you. Those joining us on Zoom can click on the raised hand symbol, which you'll either find in the participant window or in the reactions button on your Zoom toolbar. Our technician will invite you to unmute yourself and introduce yourself. You may also, or instead, click on the visitor link you'll find now in the chat window. No one in the live congregation? Anybody on Zoom? Okay, thank you and welcome to all who have joined us today. If you'd like to learn more about our congregation or Unitarian Universalism, you can stop by the table in the lobby and speak with our friendly welcome table host. Or if you're joining us on Zoom today, you can find in the participant window someone with a welcome before their name. You can reach out to that person privately or in the chat window now or after the service. We welcome the chance now to greet each other. The congregants joining us today on Zoom will be offered virtual breakout rooms.
I'm Karen Kaufman, and I'm a member of the Social Responsibilities Council and the Inclusivity Team. I'd like to thank Dawn Dana for suggesting that we notice in our service today that yesterday, November 20th, was the Transgender Day of Remembrance. That day has been observed annually since 1999 to remember and mourn the many transgender people murdered during the past year. Last night, Albany UU hosted a moving memorial service organized by In Our Own Voices, which, if you don't know, is the local organization that provides a variety of services to trans people of color in the Capital Region. Each year, the number of reported murders of trans people for the past year is released in November, and this year the number set a new record. Murders of trans people in the United States doubled from the previous year, and 89% of those were of people of color. But the reported cases number is only the tip of the iceberg, and also does not include the number of our trans siblings who were driven to suicide. Trans people struggle daily with threats of violence, discrimination, misunderstanding, and police harassment, and are often victims of intersectional misogyny, racism, xenophobia, and hatred of sex workers. I hope everyone will join me in honoring these lives lost by rededicating ourselves to working toward a world where our trans brothers and sisters can see themselves as joyful and thriving instead of as victims of oppression and violence. Thank you.
For all the joys and sorrows that are left unspoken, let us hold all that we've heard and felt in our hearts.
Our prayer of affirmation comes from Thich Nhat Hanh. You are me and I am you. Isn't it obvious that we inter-are? You cultivate the flower in yourself so that I will be beautiful. I transform the garbage in myself so that you will not have to suffer. I support you. You support me. I am in this world to offer you peace. We are in this world to bring joy. May it be so. And we're going to have another hymn, number 68, Come Ye Thankful People, led again by Alyssa Yeager.
First verse on Allah again, if I remember.
As we extinguish the chalice, please join in the words shown on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Our words for benediction is from the Prayer for Living Intention by Joseph Cherry. If we have any hope of transforming the world and changing ourselves, we must be bold enough to step into our discomfort, brave enough to be clumsy there, and loving enough to forgive ourselves and others. May we, as a people of faith, be granted the strength to be so bold, so brave, and so loving. We'd like to thank everybody today, and those include our musician, Alyssa Yeager, our ushers, Dawn Dana and Kristen Abbas, our pastoral care associates, Donna Meixner and Chuck Manning. The service associate is me, Al DeSalvo. Our welcomers today are Amy Lent and Elizabeth Barbarian. Our greeter today is Sigrid Newell. Office support comes from Tammy Hathaway and Patience Plichette. Technical support, Chris Jensen and Dick Dana, and our flowers today are donated and arranged by Sandy and Dave Sohn in celebration of love.